Hey everyone, it's Wise, and after a long time, I have finally did it. I've read the Kane Chronicles, and I just finished it about a week ago, and wow. I am blown away by the series, and I have no idea as to why I didn't pick them up sooner. These books are amazing. I honestly didn't expect to love them as much as I loved it now, and in this video, I'll be giving my quick thoughts on the series. But before we continue, I have to give a spoiler warning for all three books of the Kane Chronicles. So with that, let's get started. To give a quick overview of this trilogy, it focuses around Egyptian mythology, and we have two main characters. The first one is Carter Kane, and the second one is Sadie Kane. The two of them are siblings, but they grew up very differently because of their mother's death. Their grandparents, aka their mother's parents, hated their dad Julius Kane, and blamed him for their mother's death, so a court hearing that took several days happened, and the grandparents took custody over Sadie. Sadie was then raised in Britain, while Carter was raised by his dad, and he and his father would travel around the world and constantly move from one place to another. The only time Carter and Sadie can visit each other is twice a year, and the trilogy opens up to one of those 2 days. So now, let's talk about the characters. Starting off with Carter, since he had the first perspective in book 1. So ever since the Red Pyramid, I would say that I really like Carter's character. He's kind, caring, he often thinks before he speaks, and overall, he's a great guy. And if you compare him to Sadie, Sadie is quite the opposite. Okay, so don't get me wrong, I love Sadie as a character, but my first impression of her was quite different to Carter's. Sadie is sarcastic, sassy, rebellious, fierce, confident, and comparing Carter's think before he speaks personality makes a clash between the two of them. Also, their sibling relationship is just so realistic. With all honesty, I didn't really like Sadie at the first few chapters of the first book because she's just so reckless. I mean, there was this one time when their Uncle Amos told them to not go into the library, and once Amos was out, Sadie forced Carter to go into the library with her. But as the series went on, she started to grow on me, and I ended up loving her character. So now, we go through Zia Rashid, and we all know by the last book, she becomes Carter's girlfriend, and I'm going to talk about their relationship. Throughout the Kane Chronicles, I would say that Zarter, or the ship for Zia and Carter, is by far my most favorite ship. It's clear by the first book that Carter liked Zia. I mean, Sadie even said in the chapter, "There's no chance Carter would tell this part properly as it's about Zia. Shut up, Carter, you know it's true." Also, the interaction between Carter and Zia about Zia's family was a great touch by Rick. But, by the end of the Red Pyramid, we learned that Zia wasn't actually Zia, and that she was a Shabti this entire time. I couldn't help but feel bad for Carter because he just fell in love with a clay statue, and that's the reason why, in the next book, Carter went on a quest to find the real Zia. And while seeing Shabtis in a museum, he thought, falling in love for the first time had been hard enough. But when the girl you like turns out to be ceramic and cracks to pieces before your eyes, well, it gives breaking your heart a new meaning. Also, Carter going on a quest to find Zia reminds me a lot of Leo swearing on the river Styx to go back to Calypso. It's quite similar because, during the second book, Apophis, or the main antagonist in the series, is threatening to get out of his prison, swallow the sun, and end the world. And with this in mind, Carter and Sadie has to do whatever they can to prevent that from happening, and despite that threat, Carter still wanted to find Zia, and this is kind of like Leo swearing on the river Styx to go back to Calypso, even if he knew how dangerous Oz could be, and that he could never find Ogygia a second time. The fact that Carter risked the fate of the world to find Zia is just beyond me, and this just proves how much he actually cares about her. And when they finally meet, Zia just woke up from an almost endless nightmare, and wow, I feel so bad for Carter in this scene. Zia couldn't breathe, and Carter was panicking, and according to him, he did the only thing he could think of, which was mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Zia starts to breathe, and apparently, she thought that Carter was kissing her, and she punches him so hard in the chest that he made a squeaky noise, and she faces him and said, "Don't you dare kiss me." I mean, poor Carter. I felt so bad for him. But eventually though, Carter and Zia do get close throughout the book, and at the last book, Zia even kissed them, and that scene is by far my most favorite moment for the two of them. So, speaking of romance, we had to talk about the romance Sadie had, because it's quite different compared to what I've read in the past. So, in the first book, it's revealed that Sadie had a crush on the god of funerals Anubis, and while we're on the topic of Anubis, I had to say that he looks a lot like Nico the Angelo. I mean, the two of them have so much things in common. Both Anubis and Nico are associated with death, Nico being the son of Hades, and Anubis being the god of funerals. Both had the nickname Death Boy, and both had the description of having pale skin, dark hair, black clothes, and an aura of death. And finally, the two of them end up with a blonde and blue-eyed character, Nico ending up with Will Salas, and Anubis ending up with Sadie. So going back, the Anubis and Sadie relationship isn't exactly loved by fans. Some are saying that the age difference between the two of them was concerning since Anubis was a god who lived for millennia, and Sadie is just 14. So, right off the bat, when Sadie admitted that she liked Anubis, I was okay with their relationship, until the next book, she said she also liked a character named Walt Stone, and we'll talk about his character later. But right now, we'll focus on Sadie's love interests. The fact that Sadie was in love with two characters shocked me, and honestly, I shifted with both of them, and I didn't really know how Rick would settle it. I thought that Rick would just make Sadie end up with Walt because Anubis was forbidden to see Sadie by the wind god Shu, but what he did surprised me. He made Walt be Anubis' host. I mean, there are different ways to set a love triangle, but I didn't really expect this, and I couldn't blame Sadie for getting frightened at the fact that they were now combined. But in the end, I liked it. Like I said earlier, we had to talk about Walt because what he's forced to get through in his life is heartbreaking. So, Walt had a disease that he got from his ancestors, and he was just basically dying. But despite this, he still wants to live in his life and do magic like he was born to do, even if magic shortens his already cursed lifespan. And I love this character because of that. So now, let's talk about Bess. Bess appears in the second book, and he just... well, since I read Percy Jackson, Heroes of Olympus, Trials of Apollo, and Magnus Chase, and literally every Riordan-verse related series, I'm starting to think that Rick Riordan is killing very kind and selfless characters that didn't deserve to die. Wait, that's supposed to be a picture of Bess, not them. Okay, there it is. So going back, in the Throne of Fire, Bess sacrificed his soul for Sadie and Carter, and I just met Bess in that book, but for some reason, it made me feel so sad. He lost his soul and was forced to go in the home for the aged place in the Duat. And that's the reason why I was so happy in the last book when Sadie went on a journey to get his soul back. Also, the mention of Manhattan having other problems just made my day because Rick is obviously referring to the Greek gods in the Empire State Building. So now, I'll be answering the question, what do I think of the Kane Chronicles getting a Netflix adaptation? Well, let me tell you. After finishing the series, I would say that the Kane Chronicles getting a Netflix adaptation had me so excited. I think that not many people in the Riordanverse fandom really knows about this news because, compared to the rest of the books in the Riordanverse, the Kane Chronicles is quite underrated. And I agree with people saying the fact that it's getting overshadowed by Percy Jackson. It is really overshadowed to the fact that I don't really see people talking about the Netflix adaptation, but instead, everybody's talking about the PJO adaptation in Disney+. Even if I prefer Percy Jackson to this series, I would want people to try the Kane Chronicles at least once because it's also an amazing trilogy. I'm really excited to see how the Netflix adaptation would move forward, and I hope and pray that it would be faithful to the books and not end up like the horrible Percy Jackson movies. So how about you? What's your thoughts on the Kane Chronicles? Let me know in the comments down below.